Good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Tim McGuinness. I'm a director of the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams. It is Saturday at 11 a.m. This is our SCARS webinar series. And today we're going to be talking about romance scams and a couple of the significant variations of those, just to do a little bit of scam basics and go back over the turf. Joining me is Debby Montgomery Johnson. Good morning, Debby.
Good morning, Dr. Tim.
All right, we're going to jump right into our PowerPoint because I'm sure you don't want to look at this ugly mug all day. So bear with us here. Okay, this is part of our SCARS webinar series. And an important notice. The views of the speakers and presenters are not necessarily the views of the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams, Inc., an incorporated nonprofit organization. SCARS is not responsible for the accuracy of any information provided during this presentation. The speakers are solely responsible for their comments, content, and sartorial appearance. All right. This SCARS webinar is presented by myself, Dr. Tim McGuinness, and Debby Montgomery Johnson, who herself is a SCARS director, entrepreneur, motivator extraordinaire, author and publisher, military veteran like myself, and victim supporter and advocate. Today we're going to be talking about romance scams, romance fraud really. We're going to touch on the topics of pig butchering scams and military impersonation fraud. This webinar is copyright 2022 SCARS. Now, romance scams have been around for a very long time, literally hundreds of years. And the result is that it doesn't come as a great surprise that when the world moved online, this type of scam moved online with it. However, the big difference is the industrial scale of this. But fraudsters have always been pretending to be in love with people to get their money or assets or whatever it may happen to be at one point or another in the past. Perhaps you're familiar with these folks. Now, this is a movie from the 80s. Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, and romance scams were actually a part of the tricks of the movie. One of the things that is important to remember that historically that romance scams were always done in person. You would have some scammer come along like the Tinder swindler, or others, and sweep a partner off their feet and take them for everything that they were worth. Another reason why we bring up this movie is it's a comedy about scammers, about criminals, yet the audience is led to like them, admire them, even identify with them. Yet, in fact, they're criminals. This is an example of how society minimizes the role of criminals in these kinds of scams. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit more. But I wanted to raise this up that, you know, there has been a lot of information about scams and scammers in the media for decades. Now, romance scams as we understand them today, romance fraud, has been around online since the early 1990s. In fact, I myself have been educating people about these crimes since 1991, back in the days of America Online and CompuServe. Debby, when was your first experience? How long ago was that?
It started in 2010 and went to 2012.
So you've had a little over a decade, 1.2 decades experience.
That's right. And it's been extraordinary, let's put it that way.
Okay. one of the things that most people don't really understand about scams is how prevalent, how extensive it really is. There are estimated to be well above 50 million romance scam victims worldwide to date. That number could be much larger. It's just a best guess. We know that in the United States, there were approximately 2 million relationship scam victims in that 1 year alone. Worse, it's estimated that 50% of all online profiles and accounts are fake. 50%. That means no matter where you go, at least half of the people there are going to be fake in one capacity or another, especially Facebook. And that's according to Facebook's former president himself, who blew the whistle in late 2018. And unfortunately, big tech does nothing about this.
That might be a topic one day to really dive into, because people ask me that all the time. Why can't Facebook take these down? Why can't, the dating sites prevent these? And they probably can. And the question is, why don't they?
Well, that's a topic for another day, but it comes down simply to a US law called the Communications Decency Act, which I helped enact, create through a consortium of businesses that I was directly involved in. But it comes down to a catch-22. If they actively go out looking for fakes, then they become liable. If they, on the other hand, simply ignore them and wait to be told, then they incur no liability per this law. However, something quite miraculous happened this week that I think everybody overlooked. Of course, you've all heard about Elon Musk buying Twitter. What is not reported is that Musk has within his plans a variety of monetizing of Twitter. My belief, and that's all it is at this point in time because the full plan has not been laid out, is that he's going to use monetization. In other words, it will be free for certain people and it will cost for others. And this in turn will change the dynamic on the number of fake profiles that are on Twitter. Because they will end up requiring something of account holders. Not sure what it is. It may cost $1 a year. Not exactly sure, but the idea of using a payment methodology as a way of not only making the company profitable, because he just discovered after buying it that Twitter lost $130 million last year. Not exactly a profitable business. But on the other hand, if in turn he can make it profitable and use payment methods as a way of verification, that's going to help improve the situation dramatically. Not 100%, but maybe 85%, maybe 90%. Anyway, going back to the problems. So today, we're going to talk about pig butchering and military impersonation fraud. Now, pig butchering, let's talk a little bit about that. What is it? All right, so pig butchering, in essence, is a hybrid fraud. It's a new evolution, and we'll go into that in just a moment. Its primary characteristic is that it marries one of the challenges of traditional romance scams, which is making contact, building trust, going through the grooming phase with the amygdala hijacks, etc., on into manipulation, gaslighting, etc., so that the victim is firmly under control and will do as the scammers want. But then you've got to introduce the concept of an emergency, and that's a part of the military impersonation scams. And that introduction of an emergency, whether it's a business thing that's required or whatever it may happen to be that Krakatoa has exploded and left them stranded, and they've got 3 hours before the lava comes, and they need you to send gift cards so that they can fly off the island. That's not that far-fetched. We've heard incredible things. But the point is that the emergency aspect of a romance scam, which is what caught you, Debbie, is much harder to introduce and sustain. Whereas once the trust has been built up, the scammer simply introduces an investment opportunity. A third party, they're just a recommender. And the result is the victim leads themselves through the scam in quite a different modality, which is much easier to implement.
Is this being geared more towards the younger, the millennials, or is it taking every age?
It's hitting every age, and it's hitting the group that normally would be more immune to romance scams, which is the 30 to 50-year-old range. Because it's an investment scam and the way it's constructed, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, it creates a much bigger problem for anybody with money. If you're an early millennial and you don't have any money, that's not the typical victim for a pig butchery. And by the way, the other words for it are pork chop scams, which we heard from our Japanese friends, and we'll go into more in a moment. Let's go back to our presentation. One of the other words is shajupan, which stands for the plated pig scam, literally, which roughly translates into pig butchering scam. So, as I said, this is a new evolution in relationship scams that started, we think, late 2019, early 2020, beginning from China. And once it sort of swept out of China, primarily focused initially on Chinese immigrants and descendants around the Pacific Rim mostly. But the Indians and the Nigerians have picked up on it a little bit. But there's a difference. So it's much easier for the criminals to perpetrate, but with one condition. And that is that they have to create apps or websites to convince the victim that it's a legitimate investment. So from that standpoint, they've got to have a better organized and more professional and capable team. Something that the Indians and Pakistanis are quite capable of. So are the Iranians, so are the North Koreans. So as I said, they don't have to create a fake emergency or other need for the money. They just develop a relationship and take it from there. Once the victim fully trusts the scammer, then they're golden.
You know, what came to mind, Tim, is the term FOMO, fear of missing out. And that, I think, is that one of the differences I see between this and a regular relationship fraud.
Well, there's three principal drivers, I believe. Ignoring the trust element, because that's a critical part of this. One of the elements is the fear of missing out. But to be fair, greed plays its role. The reason why we invest in anything is we're looking for a return on our money. It's not bad greed, but it's just greed to put a label on it. The second is that there's this thing that exists in the world of gambling addiction called chasing the money. My belief is that that plays a role in this as well. So the criminal shares how well they've done on their personal investments, maybe even going so far as to introduce the website or the app and invites the victim to try it too. They get the victim to invest a very small amount. Could be $100, could be a couple $100, because they want it to be a very small amount So it's an easy decision to make. And then the application or the website demonstrates growth of their money. So once that victim makes that first investment and sees the immediate return or growth on their money, their profit, this is where they're hooked. So once the victim is convinced of the opportunity, the criminal then suggests, this is too great a thing to pass up. Why don't you invest a larger amount? So let's say that they got 3x return, 3 times return on their first $100. Then they're going to be thinking, okay, what if I can invest 10,000? What if I can invest 50,000? What if I can invest 100 or 1,000,000? I can turn a very quick profit and walk away laughing all the way to the bank. So the victim then sends the larger second batch of money. Scammers will encourage the victim, you got to put in more money. Can you take out a loan? Can you put it on your credit cards? Can you borrow money from friends or family? Look at what you just made and think about how much you're going to make on the larger amount.
Do we know if more men than women are being taken, or is it even?
Truthfully, I believe this one is more women.
Really?
But there's no real anecdotal evidence to speak about thus far. Part of this is that it may play into the typical issue of all scam victims, which is men are much less willing to talk about it. So that may be why this is skewed. And it's why a lot of people believe that women make up the bulk of the scam victims because they're more willing to talk about it. But we know in the case of regular romance scams that it in fact is more men. They just don't talk about it. And also men tend to lose more money.
Mm-hmm.
So once the victim is sent the second batch of the money or third, whatever it is that's playing out in the particular scenario, as soon as that transfer comes through, everything disappears. The app shuts off, the website disappears, the scammer is no longer contactable. It doesn't end like a romance scam that we're all familiar with, where there's some attempt at an in-game scam, threats, hostility, frustration, whatever it may happen to be. They just go silent and they disappear. Unfortunately, because most of the time this is in cryptocurrency, it's gone. Now, sometimes the money is sent as real money and it's sent by bank wire transfer, sometimes by other means. So it very much depends upon the circumstance, whether there's any recourse whatsoever. But even if it was crypto, it wasn't a real wallet to begin with necessarily. So odds are the money is gone. But it's important to immediately report this to your local police and your bank, your financial institution. If you sent money through your bank, demand that they recall the transfer. The police may be able to help you. And there are other reporting options that may yield some results, may not. However, it's very unlikely if you hire a money recovery company, expert, professional, whatever you want to call them in this space, that it'll be anything more than just another scam. For most victims at this point, all you can do is try to recover from this experience. As I said, money's going to be gone. How can you avoid and recognize a pig butchering scam? It's the same old things. Don't talk to strangers. Once the conversation begins, they've got you. Because they're smarter and more experienced at what they're doing They know how to groom and manipulate people from the instant the conversation starts. The mistake that all scam victims make is that initial accepting the conversation or the message request to begin talking to the scammer. Anytime anyone mentions an investment in someone that you don't personally know, frankly, even if you do know them, run away. Mentions of investments online are not going to end well. And if this hasn't convinced you and you're still looking at it, verify the hell out of the business that you're looking at. And that means going to government websites, verifying that the company exists, comparing the addresses, looking at the website address, and making sure that everything is above board. And still then, ask your family and friends. Go to the Better Business Bureau, look it up. If it is a company outside of your country that you're planning on sending money to, don't do it. By definition, you have no recourse at all.
This is when you're going to take that pause and sleep on it, because the scammers or the fraudsters are going to want to push you to do it quickly, to
That's
really
right.
speed it up. I know I have a nephew who all the 20, 30 somethings are getting paid that I know are getting paid in cryptocurrency. And I'm like, and they're like, Aunt Deb, you've got to do this. You got to do this. And I'm like, whoa, I don't understand it. I'm not going to do it. Don't push me on it. But that generation, I've seen that they're so willing to just jump in because they're convinced it's the way of the future. And maybe it is, but not.
They're learning as they go. And one of the things that they're learning is the challenges of wallet security and liquidity on crypto. It isn't as simple as it seems. And unfortunately, most people who've gone through that path have ended up having losses. Just like novices jumping into the stock market or the bond market or the commodities market. Don't touch investment materials until you know what you're doing. So at this point, let me do a quick poll of our audience and see if they have any questions with regard to pig butchering, pork chop scams, etc., and see if anybody has a real quick question. If not, we will move on.
Awful name.
This introduces a topic that we'll talk about later, but it is the importance of terminology. It's a terrible, derogatory, insulting name. Unfortunately, it is like catfish, which is another derogatory name, and that we try as hard as we possibly can not to talk about or use. But because we publish, we sometimes have to include these terms so that the search engines can find us, and also so that victims who use these terms themselves can understand what we're talking about. Because if we said romance investment scams, maybe they'd understand. If we said pork chop scams, what's that? If you're in Japan, you know. But if you're in Taiwan, or if you're in Malaysia, or if you're in Canada, no idea. All right, since there's no questions, we'll return. All right. So now what we're going to talk about is another kind of romance scam that everybody is familiar with. And we're talking about fake soldiers. Now, this is an example of most of the impersonation scams, whether it's an ex-porn star who's moved to Ghana, or whether it's a fake businessman or an oil worker in the Caspian Sea, or wherever it may happen to be. They follow essentially the same formula. But we're going to deal with military impersonation scams or fraud a little bit now. Criminals use stolen photos and fake identities to develop a romantic relationship with the victim. The goal is to steal the victim's money. The critical element of this is the development of trust and the triggering of the victim's emotional state to make them manageable and controllable. Now remember, soldiers don't have time to romance you on Facebook while they're in a war zone. Both Debbie and I are veterans, and well, of course, when I was in the military, there was no internet. In fact, there were no personal computers at all. We used stone and a chisel to send messages. Actually, I spent my days sitting on top of a nuclear reactor, which is why my head glows. But nevertheless, it just doesn't happen. And in fact, the military has explicit rules against communication with strangers. It puts them in danger.
And I have family that are active duty, and when they're deployed, I rarely hear from them. So they are not
exactly
hours a day messaging me.
Right. So, but this really is not a romance at all. Remember, this is a deliberate act of violence against vulnerable victims. Your emotions were just tools in the hands of these criminals. You were expertly manipulated. And we've had recently quite a bit of debate about this amongst psychologists, directors, even some of the victim survivors that are in our support groups. And one of the curious things about this is this notion of love. Many victims will say, I was in love with the scammer. Well, our contention is no, you were not. But let's talk about how these scams work. How does it begin? You were contacted by a stranger online. Kind of like the pig butchering scams. Almost all scams begin by being contacted by a stranger. That is your first barrier where you have to defend the castle gate. Don't talk to strangers that contact you out of the blue. There are no Prince Charmings out there. If you want to meet somebody, go to a social event, volunteer, do something locally where you can meet real people and you can use all 5 of your senses to determine whether or not they are somebody that you want to know and contact and interact with.
Can I take just a pause here?
Yep.
On the dating sites and on dating apps, you're going into those looking to find somebody new, and they're all going to be strangers. So that's where my trust was in the system, in the social site, the dating site. I had put my trust in them that they would protect from scammers. They don't.
You didn't know at that time that on any given dating website, and it varies, even sites like eHarmony have scammers on it because scammers have money and they have people that they pay who can take the personality test to get through the gatekeeper on eHarmony, chemistry, and others. I have quite a bit of background in the dating industry throughout the 90s and early 2000s. I know how these mechanisms work. The point is, scammers have paid accounts on these dating websites. They're using the money that they've gotten from their victims. The other part, you saw what we said earlier. 50% at least of all websites and platforms are fake. It doesn't matter where you're going to go, you're going to find scammers. So, as Debbie said, when you go into a dating website, they're all strangers. If you don't have the skills, the discipline, the behaviors to identify scammers properly, you have to avoid them because you are guaranteed to run into a scammer. Not a question of if, it's only a question of when, the first 5 minutes it's going to happen, because it's going to be that fast. and they're going to be polished and scripted, and they're going to get you. As we say, everybody can be scammed, everybody will be scammed. But it can happen not just on dating websites, it'll happen on social media, it'll happen on your messenger platform where you'll get a message from some stranger out of the blue with some story using social engineering to lure you in, or even in an online game, Words with Friends. There's a gazillion games out there that have a social component where you can interact with other players. Once the conversation begins, and then within a matter of days, the criminals are beginning the grooming, setting you up for manipulation and control. This is an act of violence. Even though they're not physically there with you, this is psychological. The first act is to deploy something called an amygdala hijack or a love bomb. These are specifically intended to hijack your emotions and cause feelings without your consent. So for example, if I walked up to a stranger on the street and said, "I love you," some of them will think, "Oh, that's nice." Some of them will quite freak out because who is this weird guy doing this? But online, you don't have the benefit of any of your senses. You only see the words. The words go instantly into your brain, into your amygdala, and it triggers an emotional response before your frontal cortex, before the logical parts of your brain can even know it's happening. This is where phobias and reactions like anger, etc., come from. So these emotional responses are instantaneous and they're strong. And scammers know that if they continue with these love bombs over a period of days or weeks, you will succumb. You will become ready for the full-scale manipulation to follow.
I totally agree with that, because the first time mine said that he was loved me or falling in love with me, it was very soon on. And my initial impression was, oh, it's too soon, it's too soon. But with the continuation of it, like you just said, then it started to feel good because I wanted it to happen. I wanted to have that feeling again. So yeah, it was interesting.
And one of the interesting aspects of that is people, for example, on the interactive gaming sites that allow communication between players, is the victim had no interest in a romantic relationship, but just through the act of triggering those amygdala hijacks, emotions developed. It's an interesting lesson for all of us in our everyday life, in that these triggers are all around us. And having an understanding and appreciation for how these mechanisms work won't prevent us from feeling something, but in the 2 or 3 minutes that follow, when the logical part of the brain can kick in and say, "Hey, what the heck is going on here?" you can recognize it and minimize it and control it so that you don't become a victim of your own emotions. Doesn't mean that you're responsible or to blame, far from it. The scammers were doing this to you without your consent or permission. Now, the typical scenarios for these is a soldier's on a peacekeeping mission somewhere in a war zone in Upper Zimbabwe or Yemen or in Brooklyn, wherever the UN sends them or whatever organization that they belong to. They're lonely and they fall in love with you fast. That's the key. That's speed. All scams depend upon a certain need and urgency associated with them. Now, they want to leave and come and visit you. They need permission and money for this. Or they're widowed and have a child that's in a boarding school in Russia or Brazil or wherever they put them. And they need money to send them a gift or medicine or food. They have a box of treasure. This is the one that actually kind of gets me, because soldier says they have a box of gold from Afghanistan, and the victim never asks, Well, aren't you stealing that? Nope, I discovered it. And they want to send it to you, but they need money. This is going to pay for our future together, for our future plans and future promises. Again, no blaming of the victim, but it exemplifies the fact that victims don't do what they think they do after the scam ends. They don't see the red flags because they're already manipulated to such an extent. After the scam ends, they may think they see the red flags, but they didn't really.
That's why I called them pink flags. There was a little bit of caution. There's a little bit of caution in that. They were
But you didn't see them, you just think you did.
Yep.
So they always have a need for money, and it's always your money they need. They can't borrow money from anywhere else. It's just you. So then comes the manipulation after the story is set up. The grooming lasts anything from days to weeks, and then gradually stronger manipulation begins. One of the techniques is called gaslighting. It's a typical technique used to help isolate the victim from their support circle and make them more vulnerable and controllable. Scammer will tell you, now you got to keep this secret. Don't tell your friends and your family. They won't understand our love. They'll want to object and get in the way and keep us apart. Romeo and Juliet kind of stuff. Their goal is to isolate you from family and friends so that you will not listen to them or ask them about the things you are seeing. In most cases, victims will be handed off to different criminals for the different phases of the crime. And there are, in fact, different phases. Scammers work in teams. There's an introductory contact phase to get you to accept the messages and communication and to start talking. Typically what happens then before the next phase is they'll switch you over to another messaging platform like Google Hangouts or WeChat or whatever, because they want you isolated from their original source. And then the amygdala hijacks begin, the full-scale manipulation. Scammers are quite specialized, just like termites. Then you send your money. The criminals often ask for a small amount of money at first. Where did we see this before? This is a manipulative technique. If you send the small amount, you are many times more likely to send an additional amount, and it gradually goes up. This is desensitization. So your pain threshold gradually gets reduced as the amounts go up. With each successful harvest, yes, in the scammer's eyes, you're a farm animal. You are more willing to send more, as I said. They will ask for everything you have until you say no. And then they'll try and get more, or they'll try a different tactic. But typically what happens is the tone changes. It can become more hostile and threatening. They may also try a different tactic. A very common one is, I love you. I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm really a scammer. I'm really in Ghana. But if we could continue talking, I know that you would continue to love me.
One thing that happened with me is that he brought in his the sister, you know, and we would split whatever the money we had to come up with. She would come up with half, I would come up with half. So that made me feel like there was someone else contributing, and I was more willing to do it at that point, I suppose.
That's an interesting tactic. So for some victims, if you've been unwise and sent intimate photos, or even not, if you've given them all of your information about your employer, etc., they may try to blackmail you as well. How can you tell for sure? Well, we've already told you how you can tell for sure. Unfortunately, that's not enough for many victims, because part of the manipulation is to get you to doubt yourself. This is a classic part of gaslighting, so that you're unsure about what you think yourself and what you can rely on and be sure about. So how can you tell? It's very simple. All the information you need is on romancescamsnow.com. And if you want to see photos, we have about 1 million on scamsonline.org. However, we don't recommend that you look at photos, but if you're determined to do it, okay, there they are. But let's start with the most obvious aspect of this: military ID cards. Debbie, you're a veteran. And I was a veteran, although in my day, military ID cards were made out of leather. And
Stop.
It's really very simple. One of the things that all military impersonators will do is they'll send you a photograph of their ID card to prove to you that they're real. And it's an effective scam. But the problem is that photocopying of all military ID cards or controlled access cards is always prohibited. It, in fact, is a law. If a member of the military takes a photograph of their card, their badge, it's a crime for which they can be discharged dishonorably or go to the stockade, to jail. No member of the military is going to share their ID cards with you, period. End of story. That alone 100% guarantees it is a scam. Now, if you want to learn more details, fine. But if they sent you a photo of their ID card, it's a scam, 100%. Sometimes they'll send you a photograph of their passport. Fake passports are actually relatively easy to identify. Again, all of this information is on romancescamsnow.com, but typically you'll see things like the signature doesn't match, the name that's printed, the fake photo has a background in it. On a real passport, it does not. It's completely transparent. The type fonts are the same. They don't match. The alignment is different. It's actually really easy to spot a fake passport, because if you edit it in a Photoshop program or something similar, the artifacts are going to be very, very visible. Here are 5 concepts that will allow you to identify virtually every scammer profile. Because scammers are far from perfect, but they've gotten light years better. Again, because now they hire people to create these profiles for them. They pay them anything from $2 to $50 per profile created with associated email addresses, etc. But scammers are fast. This is a business of numbers for them. They're going to make mistakes. You just have to look for them. So sometimes there's going to be obvious mistakes or inconsistencies. Sometimes it'll be something that's odd and out of place, like a housewife from Nebraska who likes a rap star in Nigeria. That's pretty odd and out of place. Same is going to happen with soldiers. If they have a lot of friends that are an American soldier, but most of their friends are in Asia, that's out of place. The inconsistent, like if they say they were born in one place, live in another, but went to high school in a different country, that's inconsistent. The missing information. When you're having a conversation with somebody, there's information that you would expect to be part of the conversation, but they never talk about it. And then the outright false. One of the things you can always do with every scammer is typically trap them in a local place test. Here's how you do that. Scammer says he comes from Miami, Florida. And you drill down to specifics. What part of Miami are you from? Oh, I'm from Hialeah. Sounds intriguing. So you go on Google and you find a restaurant famous restaurant in Hialeah, and it's on a particular street. And you say, it's been a while since I've been in Miami, but is Palacio de los Jugos still on 67th Avenue? The scammer is either going to say yes or no. If you've given him specifically the wrong address, he's going to say no. But you can be clever about it too, particularly if you find someplace that's on a corner where it's actually on both. The real person would know this. A local place test will always turn up a scammer because they're going to be Googling it, but they're not as good as you are. So scammers are rarely good enough to fool you if you really look. Okay. Once you discover that's a scam, go silent and report them. Got that? Go silent and report them. Don't confront the scammer, because if you confront the scammer, several things are going to happen. One is scammer's going to know, but doesn't really matter. But they may come back with serious threats, which is going to instill real fear in you. It's going to be traumatic to confront them because you're not going to get your money back from the scammer. However, they may promise to send it back, in which case you've done real harm to yourself because you're going to be sitting there expecting that your money is coming back. It never will. They're just dodging you. They're just postponing and putting you off. The only way to get through this cleanly is back off, go silent, don't let them know what's going on, and begin the process of the next steps. Remember, you need to report this crime. You're the victim of organized transnational criminals. This is not some poor disadvantaged person sitting on a floor in the Ivory Coast. These are organized transnational criminals. The average scammer makes tens of thousands of dollars a month. The lowest level are bringing back a couple thousand a week. Take this seriously. The reason that scams are so out of control is that only about 1% of victims report these crimes. We used to think it was around 3% until we started doing a deep dive into the FBI numbers and other reports on the number of scams that took place in the United States. In 2020, as an example, it was estimated that there were roughly 30 million scam victims in the United States in 2020, and it was only about 1% reported that made it onto the rolls of the FBI. Every report matters. Police may not chase after the scammers, but the reports help the government to extradite them. Just this week, the FBI extradited a batch of scammers to the US, which will be part of a gang that had already partially been arrested. So law enforcement is doing its job. There were approximately 130,000 scammers arrested in 2021. Our expectations are that we may top 200,000 scammers this year. But reporting also restores your power and control in your own life. This is you stripping away the control from the scammers by reporting these crimes. It also helps you to accept that you're the victim of a crime and that you're not to blame. Reporting matters. Where to report? Okay. First thing, First thing, get prepared. We have a free guide on our Romance Scams Now on a victim's checklist for interacting with the police. This will help you get yourself organized and your information organized before you report to the police. Then you report to your local police. First, they are your first responders. And get a report number because you're going to need that. It's your proof that there was a crime. Then report to your local financial institutions and give them the report number. If there's an opportunity to recall transfers, great. The other part of it is many victims leak their financial information, bank accounts, their account numbers, routing information, certainly enough information so that the scammers can guess passwords. That's why it's important that you notify all your financial institutions, bank, credit card companies, etc., that you are the victim of fraud so that they can take steps to protect your accounts and you. Report to your national police or the FBI at www.ic3.gov or your national police. If you're in Canada, you can report to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police or to the Canadian Cyber Fraud Center. Same within Europe and elsewhere in the world, but also report it to the FTC because they're also a global clearinghouse to law enforcement using this particular link because it gives increased attention and visibility on your reports. Also reported into the SCARS Global Network at anyscams.com. And be sure that you keep the evidence. It may be painful. Stick it away in a drawer or a box and don't look at it again. If it's on your computer, put it in a folder and just leave it. You don't need to be looking at it, but you shouldn't destroy it either. It may be important at some point in the future if the criminals are extradited to the United States or caught. SCARS also publishes a complete organizer specifically designed to collect all the information and evidence about your crime. This makes it also easy to share this with the police. You put in all the information in our SCARS Red Book, and then you can just hand it to the police officer so they can copy the information into the report, and it makes it much less traumatic for you. Now, let's talk about the right terms. You've heard us use the word fraud over and over and over again, and also criminal. Try to stop using the word scam and use fraud instead. This is a serious crime. Scam and scammers is a minimizing term that makes them sound friendly. Oh, that's a good little scammer. Oh, it was just a scam. No, it was serious financial fraud. Begin to use the right terminology, and that will also help you develop the right mindset to put you on the path of recovery. But also, don't be hard on yourself, or you're giving others permission to blame you too. Don't call yourself naive or gullible or stupid or foolish. You're not. Those terms and their definitions do not apply to you. You are the victim of a crime and you are not to blame. So feel no shame or guilt. Hard as that may be, we can help you learn how to set those aside. One of the hardest things, and we talked about it last week on our webinar, is telling family and friends. I'd encourage you to look at our webinar from last Saturday about telling your story, but one of the ways in which we've made this easy is we also publish a book called our Slate book, which explains all of this for family and friends. There is a small cost, but you can simply hand the book to them and say, please read this. I'm too upset to really talk about this. Most of these crimes are going to be impersonations. There are some exceptions. Latin American scammers and Filipino scammers use their real names, but most of them are impersonations. So avoid strangers, verify everything, never respond to their demands immediately. If you've gone along with the conversation and they ask you for something, stop, put it aside, wait a day. Ask your family and friends for their opinions and listen to them, and report every scam. In the aftermath, after this is all done, you may very well be traumatized. Almost all scam victims are. We're here to help. We offer do-it-yourself recovery, self-help recovery, and real professionally managed victim support groups. We also recommend that you see a trauma counselor or a therapist, if only to be evaluated. But for most victims, the therapy is very important in parallel with a support group. We now live in a world full of digital fakes. You have to be careful who you believe everywhere, every minute of every day. In the world of scams, there are lots of people who say they have a support group. They don't. They're amateurs, vigilantes, or instant saviors. They are not experts. We are. You have to be careful because everything online is full of misinformation, disinformation, urban legends, etc. Not just the scammers, but some of the people that say they want to help you. About 50% of the anti-scam groups on Facebook are in fact run by scammers. We get them taken down as fast as we can, but it's an impossible task without the active collaboration of Facebook. SCARS is a partner of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Cybercrime and Infrastructure Security Agency for victims assistance. We're also registered with Department of Justice, Office of Victims of Crime in their national census crime victim assistance organizations. We're also a formal partner of the Federal Trade Commission's Sentinel reporting program. SCARS is real and we are experts. Please remember that. Be proud of yourself if you've gotten through one of these scams, you've discovered and ended this crime. Now focus on getting the rest of the work done. That includes you too. In other words, what we mean by that is your recovery. Remember that SCARS publishes a series of books specifically designed for scam victims, from our self-help recovery guides to our journals to many more. Please take a look. They're available at shop.againstscams.org. 100% of all profit goes to help SCARS help more scam victims worldwide. We do hear you. We've been doing this for 31 years, even though SCARS hasn't been in existence that long. Our team has been doing this for 31 years. SCARS has helped more than 7 million scam victims, and nearly 12,000 scam victims have gone through our recovery program support groups. Oops. If you can help us, please do. Please donate to SCARS. It's quick and easy. Your generous gift will help us offer more services to more scam victims. You can donate by going to donate.againstscams.org. But don't automatically trust us either. Verify that we are who we say we are. You'll see that we have a dedicated link with the Federal Trade Commission, but you can also visit againstscams.org and verify our corporate information and look us up on the state of Florida corporate registry. Don't listen to scams, please. We will have another webinar next week that we will announce soon. So at this point, if anyone has any questions.
Dr. Tim, we do have one question, and it was about, does the military know about scammers and scammer profiles, and what are they trying to do?
Well,
that's a big question.
This is a civilian problem. Doesn't seem logical that it is, but the military has no jurisdiction over the matter whatsoever. But, and we liaise with the Army Criminal Investigation Division, and they send off batches of fake profiles to Facebook, for example, on a weekly basis, and Facebook takes them down. But this is an industry. This is a business. So for every profile that gets taken down, there are going to be 100 more that are created. Part of the problem is that we're approaching this a little late on the social media takedown side. If victims had been reporting these fake profiles for the last 20 years, 15 years, we'd be further ahead than we are today. But it's also because of the Communication Decency Act that Facebook does nothing proactively. So the military is well aware of the problem. They do what they can do to have profiles taken down, but it's beyond their means to control it as well.
Well, the other question that you and I talked about before the show started is if you've been a victim to a military impersonation scam, how we do have a survey online. Could you tell folks about the survey that they can?
It's not a survey. It is an academic university research study. If you go to romancescamsnow.com, you'll find it listed on the homepage. Let me pull it up here.
And we've talked with the researcher, and it's very valuable to get your input if you've been a victim to this kind of military relationship fraud.
Right. So it's a study being conducted through Our Lady of the Lake University, through the Wharton School of Social Service. In other words, for getting degrees for social workers. What the study does is it allows victims to fill in their information. It's completely anonymous. You don't even have to put in your name. It's quick and easy. Takes 5-10 minutes to answer the relevant questions, and it helps the academics, Tylene, who is managing this study, to compile the impact that military impersonation is having on society and on individuals. The study covers a broad expanse of military impersonations, including real people who impersonate the military themselves, who claim that they have military service that they don't, who claim that they have capabilities that they don't. And it is a significant ongoing problem. You've heard of many US congressmen and senators who've been busted for claiming that they were either a vet or a vet of particular service, and the result is they had to resign because it's fraud. It is actually against the law in the United States to claim that you were a member of the military and you were not.
Well, that's a personal thing for us, because once you've been a member of the military, to have someone do that is it's an affront. It's very offensive to me to see the military scammers. And
I've got the bullet hole in my leg to prove it. But yes, it's a serious problem, and every vet has a personal stake in the honesty of all claims of military service. So any other questions at this point in time? Debbie, any further thoughts that you might have had?
No, I appreciate doing this because, you know, as I said, it's a very offensive for me as a military veteran and having family members that are active duty to see people being taken by scammers impersonating the military. And there are some simple things to look for, but the scammers are getting creative. It used to be like the military has a name tag on the shirts. It used to be that the scammers had the pictures so you could see the name and it wouldn't match the name on the profile. I believe they probably raised it a little higher so that you can't really see the name.
Or they edited it.
Or they're flipping them backwards so you can't do the Google search. So they've gotten very creative. But just know that the military are not going to be asking for money for leave or for sending gifts home, or, you know, and they're not going to be contacting you if they're on active duty in a war zone, or even, you know, in Afghanistan or in Syria or wherever they may be right now. They are not going to be contacting you.
The United States military has personnel in nearly every country in the world. Even the Marines at the embassies are military personnel, and those are in every country where we have an embassy. So generally speaking, because of the precarious nature of being a member of the military in another country, they're not going to talk about it until they get home. Mm-hmm. So you literally cannot trust any stranger, period, that says they're in the military and assigned, deployed anywhere that they claim to be. Now, the truth is, this is true of business people. It's true of women. Most scams, as we said, are impersonation scams. And it doesn't have to be US military. In our photo archives, we have Russian soldiers, we have Polish soldiers, French, English, Turkish, Chinese, Indian. They'll impersonate anyone that they think can be useful in furthering the cause of getting a payday.
Unfortunate.
And if you are the victim of one of these scams, either the pig butchering, romance investment scams, and again, they don't have to be romance in the case of pig butchering, just a friendship is enough to establish trust. But if you're the victim of one of these, please look us up on Facebook for our support groups, and we can help. Now, truthfully, we do screen everybody that comes in. We have to, because scammers try and get in our groups all the time, but we offer multiple layers of support. In fact, about 8 layers of support that are available free of cost to all scam victims. And if we can't help you in one way, we will refer you to our others, plus we'll refer you to trauma counselors and therapists to try and make sure that you get the best care that you can so that you can make it through this experience and come out the other side happy and healthy with a prosperous future.
A note here, when you're answering the questions to come into our support group, be honest, use your real names. I had a woman the other day said that she couldn't get into the group because she had made up a name. And I was like, we want you to be honest. We are not, in the business of working with people that are not honest. And so if you sincerely want to be part of the group, open it up and be honest and answer the questions thoroughly, completely, every single one of them, and we will look into you seriously. Otherwise, you will be denied.
So what happens is when someone applies to become a member of one of our support groups, we ask them a series of qualification questions. And depending upon how those are answered, we're going to take a look at their online profile. And if we can't determine that the person is a real person from their profile, we're going to follow up with additional questions where we dig a little deeper because we're looking for information so that we can make an informed decision. We are not, and this is something I'm going to go into in a moment where I have another lawyer's disclaimer I've got to read. We are not a mental health care provider. We're not doctors. We're not psychiatrists. We're not psychologists. We're not lawyers. We're not financial professionals. So we offer professionally managed, moderated peer-to-peer support groups, and we work extraordinarily hard to make sure that each group is both harmonious and completely safe for the safety and security of every member of the support group. There's a question about pig butchering scams.
So what kind of photos or profiles do they use in pig butchering?
Well, so pig butchering scams follow the same trajectory as all other scams. Sometimes they're going to come in as a message. Sometimes they're going to be a profile on social media. Sometimes it might even be a dating website. So you're going to see some kind of a profile behind the name. They're going to use photos like anybody else. Sometimes, well, almost always it's going to be a stolen photo, but there are exceptions. If it is a true Chinese scammer, they might actually use their real photo. They might not. They may use stolen photos.
Good to know.
Any other questions before we close?
Thanks for the information. I always learn good stuff.
Okay. Let us return to our PowerPoint for a minute. So remember, our goal is to make sure that this never happens again to any of you. And those of you who have not become the victim of a scam, we want to make sure that it doesn't happen to you. All right. As I said, SCARS is not a mental health care provider and does not provide counseling or therapy services. The statements or publications of our team are not intended to provide medical, legal, or financial advice. This is just a conversation between members. Any information provided or discussed is not intended to replace competent professional medical, legal, or financial advice. Consult a medical, psychological, legal, or financial professional before taking any actions or responding to any suggestions from others, including educational information provided by SCARS. Thank you for trusting us. So again, when we post the video recap, we will include the relevant links that were talked about today. So this has been Dr. Tim McGuinness, Director of SCARS. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Debbie.
Been my pleasure, Tim. Thanks very much.
This webinar and this video are copyright 2022, Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams. You can learn more about SCARS at againstscams.org. Thank you for joining us today and have a great weekend.